Hello everyone, this video is for the Moonlight Serenade on Georgian Bay, a beautiful reference photo that we have. The reference photo has quite a lot of detail in it. Obviously there's the moon, there's this gorgeous pine tree, there's this tree at the side. If you look closely, there's some beautiful reflections in the water there. Well, not the water, but the snow that we want to highlight. So my first objective was to try to figure out what the focal point would be. And for me, I really think it's the moon and the tree. This beautiful snow or ice and all the rocks that are here are kind of secondary. So we're going to have to make sure that we put some of the other things kind of out of focus, lost edges and so on. So here we have a cottage, I guess, and a railing. We're going to eliminate that entirely in the drawing. I was originally going to eliminate this tree, but it does have a nice way of bringing you in to sort of that S-curve into the painting itself. So I think we'll stick with that. We did do some masking. I don't usually like masking, but for this one, I think it's going to give us an opportunity to freely paint. And I'll just turn on the light here and see if that helps us to see the drawing here. Helps a little bit. I might have to adjust the exposure on this, but that is the drawing that we have. Maybe I'll just move it closer for a second. And we've masked the moon, etc., the lake. So the rocks on the lake we've highlighted. Let me adjust this a little bit. We've highlighted the snow at the front so that you can really see that snow there, and that's all been done with masking. I did originally not mask anything in the water, but for this one I'm just going to try it out and see how we do. So that's our objective for today. I've decided I am going to wet the back of the paper, and that's just to prevent it from warping. And I'm only going to wet it once. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And then we will not wet the front. But hopefully this way it will stay on our glass. It will stick to our glass, and when we tilt, it will not move. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to leave it on that side for a second and just make sure that that gets a chance to soak in. Make sure I got good coverage on that. Now I'm going to do the other side, the front side, and we're also going to let that sit while we mix our colors. There's not really a big issue in how much you wet your paper. I find the more the merrier. It's going to give you more working time. And I do like to let it sit for a minute on each side before you flip it again. Okay, so it has a nice sheen on it now, and I'm going to do the first wash. Now in the reference photo, it's quite dark, but remember this is your first wash. We can always come back and darken things up. We do want to keep it somewhat light around where the tree is, but the corners can be nice and dark, and as it gets towards the horizon, it's darker. What we're going to do before we start is just get rid of some of these pencil marks that we have that are in spots that may not be conducive to having pencil marks. So I have this Tombow eraser, Mono Zero, which I love. It's got reloadable erasers for it. I've actually never needed to reload it yet, so that's good news. I don't want to remove my masking though, so I just have to be careful not to rub the paper too much and maybe direct it off to where I want it to go. I don't want these little bits of eraser to be on there. And then I have a number of them down here in the water, which might be safe, but I'm just going to get rid of them. If I remove some of the masking, I'm not so concerned about that. So, and some of these lines are a bit too, normally I use a kneaded eraser to get rid of these, but I'm getting rid of some of them as well because they're a bit dark. And what do we have over here? Okay, that's the tree branch. Yeah, this one here is a bit dark. So just getting rid of a few of these that might interfere with the painting. I don't mind pencil marks, but it's probably a good idea not to have them so dark. Okay, and that is our paper ready to go. I'm just going to shake it off. Okay, so the next question is, what colors should we mix for this? If you look at this exposure, it's really quite blue. We didn't originally have such a blue photo. It had, I guess this is almost, some of it's cobalt, some of it's ultramarine, certainly ultramarine down here. But we're going to have to decide on our palette there. Because it's all blues and purples and really darks, I would like to add a little bit of yellow into there just to get some complementary colors going. And you know, if I look at that blue, it's probably closer to this blue. And so the opposite of that is actually an orangey yellow, because there's blue violet, which I guess is ultramarine, and maybe royal blue. So that's our complement. So we're going to try a couple of yellows, maybe some Naples yellow, maybe some yellow ochre, and see which ones go best with that. Okay, in the end, I did end up taping it down because it was trying to warp, so it's taped down, it's wet on the other side, and now I'm going to mix my paints. I'm going to start at the top, work my way down. I've got a brush that's a silver black velvet wash brush, 1 inch. I don't normally use this brush, but I thought I'd give it a try because my paper's nice and wet, and I don't want a brush that holds so much paint that I lose it all in the first wash. So I'm starting just at the corners, and I'm putting my neutral tint or indigo, depending on what that is. And you'll see I'm almost at the point where I've run out of my paint already. I'm adding the ultramarine blue. Okay, I might give it a spritz only because I want this to flow. I want gravity to help me out here. It might also be because my brush was not wet enough, so not necessarily the right thing to do in this case. But our paper's nice and wet, so I can just keep working that wash that I just put in, working it down. And I do want to add a little bit of purple around the moon, so I'm throwing that in. And a little bit more purple as I work my way down towards the horizon. And I'm going to carry that purple down into the lake. You'll see under the moon it's kind of got that purple. And then I'm going to go back into my ultramarine for the snow, for the rocks, and all of that. So just back into ultramarine, working my way down to the front snow. You could add a little bit of cobalt blue here if you wanted to have, you know, a nicer, I guess, cooler blue at the front where your snow is. So you can do that. And we really don't want to go back up into it again, but you can just do the corners and darken those up, but keep that tree nice and bright. And I think that's probably it. We don't want to fuss too much. This is just our first layer. And then around the moon, what we're going to do, where did we put, I reserved my brush for my yellow. Here it is. So I don't want to add more water to the paper. I just want to add pigment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right into the tube. I washed my brush, put water on it, and then wrung it out. So this is just going to create a glow around the moon for me. And I'm using my Jaune Brilliant, hoping that it doesn't create a, what's the word I'm looking for? Create a green. And I probably applied a bit too much paint. Might be too late to do anything, but I could just stretch out from here because there's some thick paint there. And I'm wiping my brush off every time I do this. And I'm just trying to create a bit of a glow from that moon and pick up some of that extra paint. Because it's masked, I should be all right. But that might do the trick. Okay, we'll see how that goes. Might be too much fussing, but we will see. Okay, that is the first wash. We're gonna let that dry a little bit. I guess I should say how much. We are gonna do the back trees. There's this far distant tree, there's this whole row of trees, and then there's a row of trees there. And we're going to, why don't we test our paper now? So my brush is pretty dry. It's the one I just used. And I'm just going to test it here. This is my far distant trees. And it's not a watery mixture. I'm just putting it on and trying to see whether that is going to be good enough for the distance trees. And it's not too bad. It's not spreading way out of control. And make the blue a tiny bit darker because that's almost pure ultramarine. Okay. And the other thing you can do here is just, instead of having your brush strokes dots, you can drag them up. And then I'm going to add a little tiny bit more blue just along the base here. Okay, now it may run a bit, but we'll take a dry brush. So that's not so bad for that distance. We'll probably do the one here on the left as well. And we'll put that in. This all depends on how wet your paper is. Like I notice right here, the paper is soaking wet. But where I'm working right now, it's not really that wet. Now this is where our tree starts. So just make sure that's a nice soft edge there so it doesn't show up. And then there is some darkness on the rocks. Oh, and look what I'm doing here. I'm marking the bottom of my paper. I don't know if you can see that. but that's one of the challenges of going in early. So I just have to rub that out. It's on the border, so I should be okay. But it means I have to hold my brush up further. Okay. And then I also have the bank of trees here on the left. And I'm just mixing the ultramarine with the a tiny bit of burnt sienna. So the rest of the mixture I have on my palette. I guess I should show you that. So this mixture here. Okay. And we're going to do this bank of trees. I kind of like this light here, but we'll see how this works. I'll get these in. Don't worry about the dark tree, the tree at the front, because it's going to be much darker than these background trees. So just paint right through that. If you leave a couple of gaps, that's okay too, because it might look like there's a break in the tree. Okay. All right, and then you can drop a bit of variation into this if you like, by putting a few more colors. I'm trying to get rid of my, need a bit more blue in there. That's a bit too much burnt sienna. But it is pretty dark, this whole, in the photograph it's very, very dark, which is always a challenge because the camera skews the coloring and it makes your darks look darker. It doesn't, if you're looking at something in the distance, it should be bluer and more faded out. So the camera doesn't do that. It makes things look, the darkest darks look darker and kind of skews the whole thing. So here's where we're going to take our flat brush and just take out some of the, where it's dripping down onto the wet hair. So that was a dry brush I used, and I just kind of wiped it out on a paper towel. Clean my brush and do the same thing here. So I'm going to wipe this out. Dry it again, clean it. Dry it and clean it. Okay, and I might put a tiny bit more blue over in this part. Tiny bit more ultramarine. All right, and we can always darken that up again when we go back with our next wash. I did put some masking right on along there, so I might have to adjust my tree line. See that little bit of masking there. Okay, and that's the other thing you can do is if the paint is collecting where your mask was, you can just go along and soften that out. Looked like I kind of rubbed the mask off there. I think this part is all good. And while we're at it, if you want to just continue these stripes that come off the rocks, you can do that too with a flat brush. It just helps identify which direction that snow is going in. And then same thing down here, these ridges. And I think there's actually a bit of that right in this part. Okay, so that is it. We let that dry now. Oh, one thing I should say is if you want your painting to dry quicker, you can blow dry it, but I don't really recommend that. What I do is I take it to my laundry room, and I have a rack there for drying sweaters and so on, and I just put it on that rack so that it gets air from both sides. Now while this is still damp, I'm going to do my tree line again. And I'm just going to take the paint that I already have on my palette. Hopefully that's enough. It doesn't look like it's going to be enough. I might have to mix some more up. So my ultramarine, my purple, my neutral tint, and my burnt sienna. I think I have enough of that. Okay, so I'm going to go along, and last time I started at this very back row. Again, I'm going to dab off my brush. I used just ultramarine when I did this. So let's just put that in again. A little bit darker this time. Okay, so that's the distant tree line. And then we have, this one is actually further back than that one, interestingly enough. I didn't notice that before. Okay, we're going to do this one. And we're just going to let that soften out from behind the tree so that it doesn't show up too much. Okay, I might put a tiny bit of blue in there as well, ultramarine blue. Okay, and then we have this one here, which we made our darkest. Now maybe it wasn't the darkest right out at this point here, but it was definitely the darkest as we got further down here. So I'm adding that in. My strokes are resembling a tree line. Okay, pick up a bit more paint. Now somehow this paper really got a number done on it. I see all kinds of marks coming out on it. And you can see that my paper is drying because all of this tree line has a very hard edge to it. Okay, I think that's good enough. We could soften the top of this, but it's very difficult to do without leaving a mark on the back paper. So I'm just going to take a scrubber brush and I'm going to go downwards, and it somewhat softens it, and then clean the brush, do the same. Okay, not bad. It's kind of fuzzy. It probably does the trick. Okay, so that's that. The halo around the sun is not the greatest, but once again, we don't want to spend too much time correcting that while the paper is in the danger zone. So I'm just going to take a little bit of water and put it here and kind of feather it out a bit. Very dry brush. Doing kind of what I did with the scrubber, where I push the paint this way. Part of this video is probably what not to do. I've mixed up my 4 colors, and actually on a separate tray here I've put some cobalt out too that we might use at the end. And we're just going to do a test again to see how dark these are. And as you can see, they're not very dark. So we have to add more pigment to each of these mixtures. So I'm cleaning off my brush, dabbing it on a towel, and I'm going back into all my mixtures and just trying to thicken this up so that when I put it down, it is darker. Okay, I don't really want to mix over top of my paint in case something drips. Okay, I'm going to clean my brush before I go into the ultramarine, but I dabbed it off on the paper towel before I go back into the pigment again. And by dabbing it off in the paper towel, I really give it a good dab. And let's see, burnt sienna. Let's grab more of that. So when these bubbles, sometimes I think it might just be the how fast you stir your paint. But when I get these bubbles coming up, I know I've got my paint pretty thick. If you look at my neutral tint, there is no bubbles in it. So I probably need to really dig into this paint. Really use the whole brush. I try not to use my really good brushes for mixing. But until I get something that's nice and thick there, I don't know whether I've got the right color. So let's just test that again. Neutral tint, okay. We're getting darker. Clean my brush, dab it off. Go into my ultramarine. Okay, that's looking better. And then do the same with my Imperial Purple. Okay, it probably needs a bit more as well, but the purple is probably the lightest part. So I think I'm now ready to go. The back of this is probably dried. I'm going to start again with that same wash brush that I used the last time. It happens to be dirty. I thought I cleaned it off, but I am starting with dark, so I think I'll be okay with that. And then I'm dabbing off the brush again so that when I go into this neutral tint, it's going to be still fairly damp on my brush. And if I need to, I will spray. Maybe I'll just give this a little spritz so that when I'm working, and I did tilt my paper. I'm at, I don't know, a 30-degree angle, something like that. So as you can see, it's going on way darker, although it's going to dry significantly lighter than that. And I'm adding my neutral tint in along here. Okay, and I'm cleaning off my brush, dabbing it on the paper, and going into my ultramarine. And this time I'm getting a much darker. I'm not worried about these trees. I did like the way that it left a bit of that light on the bottom here. I'm giving another little spritz just around this moon here. And I'm going to put some purple up in there. And some purple coming down in here. And then I'm going to give a little spritz. And I'm going to take a clean brush, dab it off so that I don't have too much water. And I'm just going to go around this moon again so there's a bit more water on that part. Go into my Imperial Purple and back to my brush where I had the ultramarine. Okay, and just continue this down. There's not a lot of water on this brush at this point, but I think I've got the sky as dark as I want to. So I'm going to give my brush a little bit more water as I go down here into this part. So I want this purple to be kind of light, kind of glistening here. Back into my ultramarine, and I augment it a little bit. Okay, because now I've watered down my brush a bit. Okay. Dab off my brush, scrape it off, and I'm going to put a little bit more cobalt as I get down into this part. Because this is the light of the snow, and it would have a bit more cobalt. Keep going, more cobalt. I do have a puddle that I've mixed over here. Maybe I should use that. Okay. Some more cobalt. More cobalt. And it's very dry. Let's get some water in there. Okay, just keep going. Okay. Now I do notice one issue up here. There is, and that's probably already started to dry. If I look at it, it doesn't look too great, but it looks like the paper has been marked somehow. So I'm going to completely dry off my brush. Yeah, this whole part here, it's been marked somehow. I don't know why. Something I did to the paper. But I dabbed off my brush so that it's not wetter than the paper. And I'm seeing if I can just cover that up a bit. Doesn't look like I can much. So the only other thing I can try to do is I can try to scrape out. So I'm taking a clean brush and I'm just going to go, this is a Michael Sullivan brush, and see if I can scrape that out a bit. It doesn't look like it's coming out at all. So we do have an issue there. And because my brush was wetter than the background here, it's now made a beautiful cauliflower, which my best bet is to wait until it dries and then try to get that out of there. But I am showing you a little trick that works sometimes, which is to use one of these fan brushes. And if you get that on the paper quickly and was completely dry, then it helps to take some of those out. So I have a mark on my paper, unfortunately. And I don't know how I did that. I must have scraped the paper with something. The tree's gonna end up covering it more than likely. That's probably my best strategy. So now it's darker, but how much darker did we go? Before we said we were, I think we said we were in value 2. Now it hasn't quite dried, but we are getting a bit closer to the value that we want to achieve.